Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
Are we in a recession? Well, it depends on who you ask. According to a September 2022 Forbes article called the Recession Tracker, Are We in a Recession? You can see we have two very divergent viewpoints. For example, the common definition, the general definition of a recession, and I remember this as a kid growing up, is 2 consecutive quarters of negative gross domestic product. You've heard this term before, GDP. Well, according to that, if we were using that as a metric, the U.S. entered a recession in the summer of 2022. Now, on the other side, the organization that defines U.S. business cycles, the National Bureau of Economic Research, according to this article, takes a different view. According to the NBER's definition of a recession, a significant decline in economic activity that is spread across the economy and lasts more than a few months, we were not in a recession in the summer of 2022. And look, here's the problem when you start talking recession. There's the actual fallout and effects in the economy itself, and I mentioned this in last week's episode, more than that, there's the mental fallout that occurs. If I'm someone who, is in an industry where I think I might be affected by a recession, which really would affect everybody in a sense if it starts to spread, then maybe things that I was going to buy that I would have considered quote unquote elective, I'm not buying now. I'm holding off. I'm saving my money. I only want to do things that I need. So then that starts to affect the overall economy, and eventually you might see it affecting your practice. And look, regardless of what we call all this, the fallout from the last 3 years, we've had unprecedented actions the last three years economically between money printing, 8.5% is the recent metric on year-over-year inflation. We all remember the employment market that began to get all kinds of wonky in 2020 and has carried forward to now. So things have just been a bit weird. So if we were to liken economic uncertainty, which is sort of what we're running into now, to a ship on rough water, if you want to make sure that you get where you want to go, sailing a ship on rough water, you would take preventive actions. You would make sure everything was tied down. You would make sure that your pumps were working, because ultimately you want to get where you want to go. And that's what I want to talk about in this week's and next week's episode of Dental Business RX. Yes, it is a 2-parter again. There's a lot of material. We're going to be talking about how to recession-proof your practice. In other words, not just how to survive a recession, but how to thrive despite a recession. I'll be joined in these episodes by a special guest, Sabri Blumberg, the Deputy Chief Operating Officer here at MGE. Sabri is in charge of all of MGE's technical delivery. She is responsible for everything that happens with an MGE client. She's also the most knowledgeable person when it comes to client delivery. All right, so Sabri, I think we have you hooked up over there.
Yes.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's been a while since you've been on.
Yes.
It's been how many episodes since we last had you on. We'd
right.
have to have you on more often. So I know you've had a lot of clients asking about this.
Yes.
Are we in a recession? Are we going into a recession, et cetera? And
yes.
You even came up with a whole checklist of items for people to follow to recession-proof their practice, which we have as a download on the episode webpage if you want to download it, if you're listening out there. But now you were mentioning something to me earlier. There was sort of like 7 areas you're having people focus on.
Yeah.
But there's sort of an attitude as well. And I thought I would just let you roll through that. I thought that would make excellent material for this episode because then people can start applying this at home.
Yeah, it was interesting because I was talking to you as I was making the checklist. You and I talk. And the interesting thing was like, how do you come up with something that anybody can use in any practice? Because there's really 2 different considerations. And the first thing is that every dental practice is so very different, depending on whether they take insurances, how many operatories they have, how many patients they have, their clinical philosophy, whether they're doing big cases or not. So how do you apply this, or how do you recession-proof a practice is very much dependent on what kind of dental practice do you have and what's your dental philosophy.
Right, because you have one office doing $900,000 a month and another one doing $120,000, doing completely different types of treatment.
Right, and then you have some doing $60,000. Right. So and some are in the city, some are in the country. It's just it makes a difference. And then the other interesting thing that you're dealing with is you have on the one side of the spectrum, dentists that are really not concerned about anything that's going on, and then on the other side of the spectrum, people that are deeply concerned.
Right.
and want to do something right now and are almost anxious about it.
Got it.
Right? So, regardless of what your viewpoint is on what's happening right now, which we're not economists and I really don't care.
Sure.
In any business situation, you gave an interesting example. You gave the example of the ship, right? That, you want your ship secure, regardless of whether there is rough water or calm water.
And I should mention, Sabri's fully qualified to talk about this. I am a full-blown landlubber. She's actually kind of an accredited and certified sailor. So anyway, sorry.
Right. Anyway.
She was looking at me weird as I'm giving the examples. Anyway,
no, it's fine. Anyway, you're going to tie down your things properly before you get in a storm. You're going to make sure that all these things that should be secure are secure, regardless of whether you're in a storm or not, so that when you are in a storm, you can just sail through it, no problem whatsoever. So what we came up with is like, okay, how do you create a practice that can pivot on a dime?
okay.
It can expand and flourish in a what you would consider to be a normal economic environment. But at the same thing, if the waters get rough, it can continue to flourish by changing just a few things. It can sail through that, no problem. And we saw that during COVID. Right? Where really some unexpected things happened, and we were kind of trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we get these clients to expand, regardless of what's going on? And I think what that taught us more than anything is that, most of our clients actually had their best ever year, COVID year.
I know that's what still people don't believe that, because you were just saying you were evaluating a practice for a client recently.
Yes.
And you were looking at how the brokers were pricing these.
Yes.
And they had a built-in expectation, like they were using 19 numbers.
Yes.
Because they had a built-in expectation that 20 was going to wreck the averages.
That's correct. And you know what was interesting? Because I've looked at a lot of practices, because our clients are buying a lot of practices right now. What was interesting, when you look at these numbers, ordinarily 20 is down.
And I think the ADA estimated it was going to be down 38% on average.
Correct, but that's not what we saw with our clients.
No, we had actually, and I've said this before, we had more highest evers in 2020, meaning best ever years in collections in 2020 than we'd ever had at any point in time in our history for our client base.
Right. But it does prove the point that regardless of what goes on in the economy, people need dentistry. It's not an elective service, and you can flourish because you have a needed product if you are handling your business practices internally correctly.
Right. And that's what I think, not to chime in.
No, please chime in.
The one thing I noticed during COVID, because we took a lot of precautions during COVID, we saw things were getting a little weird starting in February, beginning of February of 2020. And, we're a seminar company predicated on the concept that people are going to travel here.
Yeah.
Right? So.
At least we were.
Yeah, well, right. We're not predicated on travel. A lot of our services are online. But at that time, we looked and we ordered all of our streaming equipment. We started putting our courses online, because the worst we thought was going to happen was there would be travel interruptions. We had no idea that our clients would be shut down for 1 to 3 months.
Right.
That was the one thing we didn't predict. And we're pretty crazy about predicting things.
Yes.
So I guess not that we're holding ourselves up as an example, but the point being is you want to be pretty much ready. You said pivot on a dime.
Yes.
If you want to be successful, you want to put yourself in a position where A, you can move quickly and change, and B, because this is where I saw the fallout, and this is why it helped doing this with our clients and all of us as a group, because it wasn't just us, it was the clients to clients that did this, is that people get into this frame of mind when something bad happens, they just sort of, sulk. Not really, sulk's the wrong word. They just get sort of beaten down and they're upset.
Withdraw.
Yeah, they're withdraw, they're upset, they're laying there, oh, it's so bad, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But really, that doesn't do anything for you.
No.
No, you have to be able to pop out of that and focus on what's happening here and now and move.
That's right. It's more like the shock takes you by surprise because you don't know what action to take.
Right.
But it's interesting because as doctors, they have action plans in place for if they have a medical emergency in the practice. So it really, yes, it's a problem, but they know exactly which steps to take in order to treat that patient in the best possible way that they can, handling that emergency, right? Okay, so this is an action plan. You do need to have things in place beforehand.
I mean, the most important thing in my view is the attitude.
That's right.
Yeah, they have to be, if things change, the less time you spend worrying about how things change and the more you can focus on making things better, the better you are.
Yeah, and quite frankly, right, I mean, these things are common sense things. We'll run through them. If they have these in place now and nothing ever happens, all that means is their business expands quicker.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that as well, because one of the things as far as proving this out, so, we had set up for us to deliver during COVID. You and I were live streaming every day to our client base, keeping them on top of, different laws because there were all these laws passed at the time, FCRA, the federal, I forget what it's called anymore, the Coronavirus Relief Act, how does this affect my practice? And then there was the PPP, and then there was this, and then there was that. And then how do I keep my employees busy so I don't have to just let everybody go?
Right.
And then what I thought was cool is we started that client group, the clients were helping each other. So I think that sense of community helped everybody pull through.
Very much so.
But then we saw clients who would normally get 50, 60 new patients a month being available for emergency care because that's all you could do.
Yes.
All of a sudden seeing 200-300 new patients a month. In a lot of cases, they were the on-call doctor for people they didn't even know.
That's right.
For offices that had shut down.
That's right.
And that's just to speak to your point is what happened is after the shutdowns, depending on what area you're practicing in, if you were in New York City, it might have been July, right? If you were in Florida, it might have been May. But after the shutdowns, pretty much universally across the profession, you saw an increase the next month.
That's correct.
Because you were back at work.
That's right.
And there was that backlog.
That's right.
But then it started to slag off afterwards.
That's right. They kind of sagged once things got back to normal.
With MGE clients, what we saw was they were working on manuals and procedures and role-playing with their staff and calling
really
patients.
Their hygiene, like all the things they had no time for, like
now
really
they had time.
Activating all their patients for when they opened again. And they did great.
So when our clients reopened, it was almost like a wound-up spring. They had that big bump the first month, and then it just rocked from there. That's why you'd see clients having best ever year by October, even though they were shut down for a month or two.
That's right.
So just to speak to your point, sorry to interrupt, but the more prepared you are, you not only do okay, you come out on fire.
That's right.
In a good way.
That's right.
Yeah. Not actually on fire.
I hope not.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so sorry. But go ahead.
So regardless of whether we're in a recession or not, these points that we're going to go over are things that you should have in place regardless.
Got it.
Right? And they're going to help you weather any storm. And if there's no storm, they're going to get you where you want to go faster.
All right. Good. So I think what we'll do, we'll just have you start.
Yes.
We'll get to the point where we'll break off for this week, and then we'll pick up with the rest next week.
Yes.
All right. So I'll let you go.
Okay. So the first point that I listed, and it's kind of a funny point. It says, right, on the checklist, okay, your practice cannot be dependent upon new patients.
Okay.
But your practice needs a lot of new patients.
All right. So you want an office that's not dependent on new patients, but they should be getting a lot.
Yeah. So what does that mean, right? A lot of practices, just because of the general philosophy in dentistry has been that your best sale is a new patient sale. Like we really focus on the new patients and making sure that they are accepting the treatment that you are presenting to them, right? So when your sales are predominantly coming from new patients, where you're dependent upon new patients for your income or your sales,
right.
That's a really bad situation to be in because you're essentially starting your business from scratch every month.
So essentially you have a GP becoming a specialist.
That's exactly right. But a lot of GPs are doing that to themselves, and they forget that the majority of the work, the majority of their sales, and the average is 60% of their charts have outstanding work in them. So they need to not have an attitude about, okay, I've already presented this to somebody. Not everybody buys everything they need the first time you present it.
That's true. Yeah.
Right? As a matter of fact, the majority doesn't, right? They kind of have to get used to it mentally, or maybe you didn't have enough time to really explain it to them, or for whatever reason, the patient didn't proceed with the treatment, right? But that's actually your easiest sale. And that's where the majority of your sales should be coming from. And your new patients should simply augment that. It should be your gravy. It shouldn't be the main meal.
Okay.
Right? So your practice cannot be dependent upon new patients, meaning make your existing patients your main meal.
Okay. So
right.
the primary, so 60% or what percentage of my revenues should be coming up from patients of record?
Yeah, I have an interesting viewpoint on that. in order to make the overhead of the practice.
Okay.
Right? The overhead of the practice, which the overhead includes your salary, like
Sure.
how much money the doctor should be taking home,
Yeah.
and putting some money into reserves. That's considered part of overhead.
Sure.
Right? Should be covered by existing patients.
So patients of record cover my overhead. New
Correct.
patients are sort of the driver of growth and the excess profit.
That's exactly right. They are the,
okay.
so you have to, when you do your income planning for the month, that should be done on existing patients, not new patients.
Okay.
And then your new patients are simply your gravy and they expand your business.
Got it.
Right? That's all. So your practice should not be dependent upon new patients.
Okay, but we want to get a lot anyway.
I want to grow my patient base.
Right.
Right. I want to have bigger hygiene. I want to have more sales. I want to expand my patient base. Right. But I want to not live on those new patients because then I'm essentially discounting the patients I already have.
Okay.
That I've already paid for, that already know me, that are easiest to sell because they already trust me. Right. So you can't have a dependency on new patients, but you need new patients.
Got it. And just as an aside, if you want to know more about getting new patients, this is my mini advertising.
Go for it.
I put the link for the MGE New Patient Workshop on the episode webpage,
Yes.
where people see about a 42% increase. That's the average increase in new patients per month just from
Yes.
that workshop. You should check it out. It comes with a
Yes.
money back guarantee. Anyway,
Yes.
there's my mini
and
commercial.
just to kind of add to your plug,
Yeah.
right? Because new patient seems to be this mysterious area.
Sure.
Like, how do I control my new patients, right? And just to kind of give you a little bit more data on that, that sounded bad, but to just kind of speak to your point,
Yeah.
right? New patients are not difficult to get. New patient area is such an easy area if you know what you're doing. The same thing that doing a crown for the doctor is such an easy thing to do, except when you hand me the hand piece, it turns into a disaster because I don't know what I'm doing.
I think that's illegal.
Right.
Anyway.
I said disaster,
Yeah.
right?
I think it's just straight illegal.
That would include lawsuits and such, right?
Anyway.
Anyway.
All right. So we got that one.
So these are areas that are very easy to get under control, is all I'm saying.
Good.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
So that's point one.
Yeah.
Okay, so now the second point is the practice must make its overhead on regular, bread and butter, health-related dentistry.
Okay. So now, can I clarify?
Yeah.
All right. So you say it has to make its overhead on regular bread and butter dentistry. So you're
Yeah.
talking about stuff that affects more health and function, not necessarily aesthetic.
Correct.
What about large cases?
Well, now, and here's the interesting part. That doesn't mean I don't want them to do large cases. If they are trained to do large cases and enjoy that kind of work, they should definitely be doing it. But the practice cannot be dependent
Right.
upon them. I mean, we're talking about, so let's take a look at like the subject that we're talking about. We're talking about if we go into a recession.
Sure.
By whatever definition, right?
There are many.
Yes,
Apparently.
apparently,
Yes. Yeah.
right? But let's just pretend that. Okay, so let's refer back to 2008.
Okay. So what happened in 08?
Okay, what happened in 08 is people were prior to 08. It was very easy to get financing.
Right. You had to be alive and have a pen.
That's essentially the requirements, I think.
And alive,
right?
I don't know if, yeah. You had to be a mammal and have a pen.
Well, I don't know. Somebody needed to be able to sign your paperwork. I think that
Your
was
dog.
the only.
Anyway, yeah.
right?
It was pretty bad.
It was so bad,
Right.
right? And we saw, interestingly enough, that was also the same time that I became aware of these, of GPs doing these larger cases. I mean, there were like, there was a company called LVI that was super,
Yeah. A lot of full mouth reconstructions, things like that.
That's exactly right. And dentists that were doing them were really enjoying those cases.
Sure.
And it was also extremely profitable to do these cases.
Sure.
Right. But they did rely heavily upon financing
Right.
to do those cases. So that when the financing dried up all of a sudden, nobody, regardless of what the patient wanted, I'm not even talking about their mental attitude, like, do I want to spend $50,000
They
right
just
now?
couldn't get approved.
We just couldn't approve them, right? And these guys, we got a lot of clients that way after 08 that essentially didn't have a practice left. They didn't have a base left because they had set themselves up to almost be a specialist doing these bigger cases, and that normal I mean, I don't know if I want to call it normal.
No, I get what you're saying. So like if you're, because it's obviously for a dentist,
Yes.
it's going to be a lot more fun. I'm assuming, at least from the docs I've talked to,
Yeah.
they much prefer doing a big FMR case.
Yes.
Or even an all-on-6 case or something like that. That's fun. It's a big payment, but it's not even the payment. It's
No.
they get to use all their clinical skills and they get
Yeah.
to make sure the occlusion is awesome and all this
And
kind of
it's
cool stuff.
interesting to them.
Right.
And
Keeps it exciting.
And I want them to do those cases
Right.
if they're trained to do them
Sure.
and they enjoy it.
Yes.
I don't want them to be dependent upon them financially.
Right.
Right. Financially, it's almost like they're building two separate business models.
Okay.
Right. The first business model is just what we would consider to be a traditional dental practice, doing what we would consider to be normal health-related
Fillings, crowns,
right. And I'm
implant
not
here or
saying
there.
those big cases are not health-related and aren't great for the
Of course.
patients, right? But if we move back like 20 years ago, general dentists were not doing those kinds of cases as a matter of course like we see today.
Right. It was mainly a pros.
Yeah, it was mainly a pros or maybe the occasional one here or there, right? So, and the general dentist would just take care of the normal day-to-day dentistry. And those might have included bigger cases,
Sure.
right? If the patient's mouth needed a lot of attention. So that base of traditional general dentistry that is just health related needs to be there.
Okay. So what you're saying, if you don't mind me summarizing
No,
it.
please.
So basically you're saying, so I have a practice, let's say, and we do a lot of Invisalign, we do a lot of FMRs, we do a lot of all-on-6s.
Yes.
We're, because we have clients like this.
Yes,
that
we do.
just these unbelievable numbers, 600, 800, 900,000 a month or whatever. If you were to take all that away,
Yes.
because it's not like nobody's going to do them,
No.
but I might have trouble financing some of the folks that want to do them.
Right.
Right? If you took all that away, whatever I'm left with, the run-of-the-mill dental procedures, the single implant, the crowns, few crowns, some root canals, whatever I'm doing, the fillings, I can pay my overhead. I can meet my overhead and take home what I need to take home on just that.
Correct.
Got it.
Because people will always do that kind of dentistry.
Right.
Right. People will always be able to afford
Right.
that kind of dentistry. And that's why you need to be able to make, as I said, I didn't say don't do those cases.
Of course.
I said don't be dependent upon those cases or, those kinds of procedures, like you mentioned Invisalign, which is a really good point.
Sure.
So Invisalign is great, and you can say that's elective or not elective, depending on your clinical viewpoint or the
depending on the
case
case,
or
yeah.
whatever, right? But Invisalign has a lot of overhead connected to it. So if you take a look at, after I'm done paying the overhead on it, right, meaning
You've paid the
labs
Invisalign fee.
and including if you're saying, yeah, but my assistant does it, well, you're paying that assistant,
Sure.
right, and you're paying that, you're tying up that chair, right, and that's worth something. So once I remove the overhead from it, how much money am I actually left with? Can you live on that if a majority of your income's coming from Invisalign cases?
Sure.
You really have to focus on like the normal dentistry that will always be done that has the traditional overhead connected to it, like 7-8% for labs or supplies or whatever. Will that cover my overhead? Allow the doctor to be paid? Allow reserves to be funded? And we did a study with a doctor recently that is doing a lot of these bigger cases, and his numbers look beautiful. He's doing like 900 a month, right? Yeah, I know, you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
We're doing like 900 a month, which are very impressive numbers. And I said, okay, well, let's take all those cases away, and how much are you actually doing?
Right.
And it wasn't actually enough to cover their overhead.
Okay.
And we really billed it, and it only took a few months because usually they have the patients to do it.
Sure.
They're just not paying attention to it
Got
because
it.
they're so focused on these bigger cases.
Well, and it makes sense. You're putting, if I put X amount of time in to sell an FMR or an all-on-6 and there's this financial awards, connected to it.
Yeah.
Then yeah. And also it's obviously is the patient benefit versus I could spend maybe the percentages, it's not the same.
No.
I'll spend 20 minutes selling a crown and an hour selling an FMR. That's a huge difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I don't understand.
Yeah. No,
Right?
I get it. But see, you pulled this back and you ended up with he didn't have enough. So then what did you do?
We built the regular, normal dental practice component in his practice, which, as I said, he had the patience to do it.
Right.
We just weren't paying enough attention to it because we're so focused on the
Right.
bigger cases. It was very easy. Didn't take a long time until, I think it was a little bit more than half his income was now coming from regular dentistry, which was plenty of money to cover the overhead, cover the staff, cover everything we needed to cover, including his personal salary and everything, so that he was taken care of at home, so that regardless of anything, he's secure. And then do these big cases to your heart's content while you keep that going.
That's an interesting concept. And if you don't mind, I want to drill down on this for a second
Sure.
because there's a few things flashing into my head as I'm thinking of this.
Yeah.
Because it's almost, you said something earlier, it's almost like having two separate practices.
Exactly.
So here's just the regular old neighborhood dental practice,
Yeah.
and then you're not specializing officially.
Right.
But you're almost specializing in, okay, so we do Invisalign, that's an adjunctive service.
Yes.
We're doing FMRs, that's an adjunctive service, even though it's more of the basic dentistry, right?
Right.
We're doing all on six as an adjunctive service, right?
Right.
If you focus on it from that regard, like, okay, my practice is making it on this
Mm-hmm.
runs my business. I pay my overhead, I pay my staff, I pay myself. And then I do all these other things, which are extra, obviously, benefits to my patients.
Correct.
But also additional profit centers.
Yeah.
That's the correct way to think with that, because then all of a sudden I go from, let's say, I don't know, 70% of people are being approved for these larger cases, and that drops to 20 overnight. I'm still paying my bills.
That's exactly right. You're still taking a salary.
Yeah.
It's not a problem. And you just focus more attention on building that. And if you've been smart and have been working on your marketing area, right? Like we went over in point one, and you're getting volume new patients. You keep building that base of patients that you have that are doing regular dentistry. And that's why those two
Right.
things work together. It's important.
It almost reminds me in a way of the clients we've had from the EU.
That's right.
Right, because in the EU, I know it kind of differs by country to a
Right.
degree, and we don't have a ton of clients in the EU.
No.
But if any are listening, hello.
Hello, EU.
We know who you are.
Yes.
But I know in some of those countries, you're required to accept a certain amount of government plans.
Yes. And certain countries have.
Well, that would be like here, you
Yeah.
had to accept Medicaid to equal a certain amount of your volume.
Correct.
So I know that what a lot of it, but then there's also private patients who want to pay for high-end dentistry.
That's right.
So what they've done is they are meeting their government requirements, and they have associates working on those folks, and then they're doing the higher end stuff themselves, and it all works out.
That's right.
But there are-
Everybody's happy.
Most are meeting their obligations on the government revenue.
Correct.
Just treating those patients.
Correct. And again, anything that they're doing, they're bigger cases, or in EU, the private dentistry,
Sure.
in the United States or Canada, the bigger cases. Again, gravy. Right. So you have to focus on the main meal. I
Right.
mean, I keep coming back to that
No, I
analogy.
get what you're saying. That's what drives that's what drives it, and the rest is fun, but it's not required.
Correct.
So for the business, it's required for the patient, but not required for the business to be successful.
Correct.
Right.
And if you really want to get fancy about this, and I suggest you do, I mean, if it was my dental practices, I certainly would get fancy about it.
Sure.
You can almost treat them like two separate businesses, keep separate statistics, and even two separate overheads, because some of the overhead that you're carrying is connected solely with the bigger cases.
Right.
Personnel, supplies, things like that. Implants are expensive, things like that, right? So it's almost like you have to separate those two to make sure is the traditional dental model cash flowing.
Well, and that's interesting you say that.
Yeah.
Because I remember you telling me about, this is not that long ago, we had a client who didn't place implants themselves.
Yeah.
They brought in an associate doctor to place the implants. Good associate.
Yes.
But they were paying the associate, I think, 40%.
Correct.
But then when they actually did the numbers, because they were going, selling out hog wild to bring in implant cases.
That's right.
And they were letting those other regular run-of-the-mill dentistry that doc did regularly drop.
Yeah.
Then what ended up happening is they actually lowered their profitability.
Well, the doctor, the associate was getting paid mega money.
Sure.
Right. And the doctor was essentially going broke. But on paper,
They look great.
Oh my God, these collections look beautiful. And that's really not what running a business is about. It's not about what your income is. It's about what your profit is.
So in that case, had they just raised or kept their normal, regular run-of-the-mill dentistry at a normal level while they added the implants, it would have worked out great.
Correct. If they just thought of it as a separate business, they would have been fine. They would have seen it in 2 weeks like, oh, wait, we have a problem. I'm having I'm funding that activity.
Right. No, it makes sense.
Yeah.
So obviously do those cases to your heart's content, but your practice has to make it on your basic dentistry.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay, good. So here's what I'm going to do. We're about 30 minutes into the episode. I'm supposed to keep these around 30 minutes. So I think this is a good point to end off for now, if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
And don't forget, I have Sabri's checklist, her recession, the actual name of the checklist. When we look at it here, it's Checklist for Recession Proofing Your Practice. You can download it on the episode webpage. When we come back next week, we'll be covering the remaining 5 areas of focus that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Until then, folks, have a great week. And if you want more information or if you have any questions that came up from this week, you can email me at jeffb@mgeonline.com or Sabri. You can email Sabri at sabrib@mgeonline.com. We'll have the links on the episode webpage. And you can visit us online for more information at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. Sabri, thank you so much for being here. You'll be back next week.
Yeah.
You promise?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm in trouble if I'm doing part 2 by myself. Yeah. I'll just have you write it down for me. Anyway, folks, have a great week. We will see you at next week's episode.